gosh. Hey, CRAZYDRE Podcast. That's amazing. The CRAZYDRE Podcast.
Welcome to the CRAZYDRE Podcast Show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. As your main man, aka Crazy Crockett, aka Andre's Podcast. Brought to you by RSS.com. Thank you for those guys for distributing my podcast. Thank you, Apple, Spotify, iVoox, IVOOX. I know that people listen on that platform as well. I'd like to thank anyone out there that's listening to my platform or to my podcast on any of those platforms I just said. This is going to be a YouTube video. So this is going to be the second YouTube video of all time for me. I made one for like 3 minutes and 4 seconds about, it must have been at least 4.5 years ago, at least maybe 5, I don't know. But I was kind of interested in doing a podcast. And, I didn't really get into them until maybe I started listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, because not so much for Joe Rogan, but so much more for the guests that he would have on the show. But in order for me to go to that point, I have to introduce myself. So I go by CRAZYDRE. Now my friends have told me that have named me that for years, and of hanging out with them for 20 some more years. I am the guy that would say crazy things out loud and inappropriate things out loud. But there's also a reason for that. Now, I'm going to show you my disability, or at least one of my disabilities. It's my left hand, and it's a stroke. The stroke probability. Now, the reason why I had that stroke is probably because my birth parents abandoned me, or it was during childbirth. Now, I don't know the story behind it quite well because I was adopted. So there's nothing there to be proven to that story. But it is an indication that either I was abandoned by my mom's friend, and she took me to her apartment, and then I think she got sick of me, of having me there, because I think she approved at the time to take me in as a child or an infant. But then she realized that having a baby, and maybe she didn't have any kids, it was going to be extra work. Now, but I don't think that must have, that was one theory. My theory, though, there's another 2 theories. The other 2 theories is that my own mother abandoned me by not saying. I think my adopted parents told me that I was abandoned by my mom's friend, but I think my mom personally abandoned me. And when I think about that, when I was younger, it kind of grazed my mind to the left ear to go to the right ear, and just kind of went with it. But I never realized how much significance of that would affect my life for the rest of my life. So when I think about that, if I was abandoned by my own mother because she was out of the woodlock, and back then as Catholics, if you have a child that's within not a marriage, you either give them up, abandon them, or have an abortion. And in the 70s, you didn't have an abortion. It's very, very unlikely. You would probably in the 50s, 60s, and some of the 70s, you would have an abortion in the back of the alley or some guy's doctor's office, and they would use other utensils that's very harmful for the woman as well. Of course, for the infant or the embryo that was growing inside the woman's uterus. But the other theory is that during childbirth, I had no oxygen through the birth canal, And from that moment, my parents kind of just thought, this is too much. We can't have a child with a disability. And not only do I have a physical disability, I have a kind of a cognitive thinking or knowledge disability. So, in other words, my IQ level or capability to learn things on the spot or something new and registers in your brain very well, very fast, very slow. Mine's a little slower. Sometimes it doesn't get there, but I seem to adapt to the same routine or same project or same motion. But I can also learn other things by listening to people and understanding what they're saying. It just takes me a while for myself to, say, read a really complex literature, and you can tell that I do stutter as well. So there's other things that with my stuttering, and I won't be able to pronounce certain names or people's names, and a lot of times that can be very, very frustrating for me. But the thing is that I wanted to create a podcast, and I really didn't think I was going to put this on YouTube ever. And I never really thought I would go to a podcast, and I have it on through rss.com and Spotify and Apple, like what I just said. But I never really thought myself becoming famous or something like, oh, I'm going to be successful at this. I know that's another disability thing that I've created within my own self to downsize my ability to become something or to finish something or start something to finish it and then be somewhat successful. Now, so that's the reason why I created the podcast, is not to be so successful, but to bring a voice to men out there who are with the disability. Some form of physical disability, some form of mental disability. But I really do think that a lot of men do not get to be heard from or to be talked to or have an opinion of. We're simply just people that I feel like we're just an existence to other people's surroundings. And as long as we don't open up our mouths when we're talked to or not talked to, it's okay for us to be around them. Now, I know that some people would say, well, family members and close friends, and that seems to be all right. With people with disabilities, those men with disabilities, that's not the issue. Sometimes the issue is when you go to work or you are trying to learn a new skill at your job, or you're being not promoted because the way that you look, the way that you talk. And I'm not trying to elaborate about people's of color or like ethnicity or anything like that, but just simply of being disabled. So I wanted to embrace that a little bit, and I wanted to create something for myself. And I think I've said this in my first couple of podcasts that I've ever done. So if you want to go find it, it's the CRAZYDRE Podcast Show, and it's all capital letters, and you can go find it on Spotify and Apple and other platforms out there. So obviously you can tell this is my first time in a long time to do a video and to have a podcast. By doing this, I'm going to be a little bit disorganized. So by saying that, please excuse me for repeating myself or going back and forth. But going to what I'm saying though about the journey or writing a journal. Instead of writing a journal, I have a video journal. And I'm going to have my buddy Ron on the show. I'm going to have a friend of mine, Griff, who's a fantasy sports enthusiast. He knows everything about fantasy sports. I'm more of a guy who likes more about the teams effort. So I'm on like Detroit Tigers. Behind me, you can see I have a bunch of hats, but I love MLB, Major League Baseball. So I have everything but 9 or 7 more hats I need for the rest of the MLB. Like Minnesota Twins, Cleveland Guardians, or I like to consider them Cleveland Indians, but but other teams as well. So I'm not really a fantasy football guy. I do play fantasy football. I will report fantasy football. I did a little fantasy football with a friend of mine, Parlay Sean, that you've heard from on my other podcast. I mean, my same podcast, but earlier, but never vlogged it. So that's kind of the reason why I'm kind of setting this up, so that I can bring someone on the show like Griff, who knows about fantasy sports, knows about football, baseball, basketball. We can talk about different team effort, competition, NBA Finals, maybe Super Bowl, playoffs, Detroit Lions. So speaking of Detroit Lions, I probably will try to do a couple episodes about the Detroit Lions and certain games, or every game of this whole year. So those podcasts probably be a little shorter, like a half an hour. With Griff or with Ron, they'll probably be like an hour, hour and a half, something like that, because there's just more material to be talked about within 2 people. So when I'm going to do this podcast, I don't know, sometimes I'm just not going to be really organized. I'm just going to run with it. And some things that you guys may not agree, and you have I will have very much respect for you for not agreeing for anything that I think, do, or issue, or anything like that. That's fine. But I'm not here to really piss people off. I'm just here to give myself a avenue to speak my mind. Because when I started that podcast, I never really thought I was going to put a YouTube page on into it, because I really didn't think people really wanted to hear somebody talk about being crippled, disabled, and having some form of learning disability, and kind of being ignored a lot by the opposite sex. Now, give and take, there's guys out there that you know who you are, that there are women out there that do like you even though you're disabled, but they won't date you. And I've been through that same scenario over and over again. So I'm going to talk about that in some form of shape in itself as I'm watching the Tigers. So that's why you keep seeing me go back and forth watching the TV and everything else. Probably not really good for a podcast, for a video vlog podcast, because you want to stay focused to the camera. I know. So I'm not going to claim myself to be Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson or any philosophical, super knowledgeable person or anything like that. I'm just going to give myself a platform to talk about whatever I want to talk about. So I think what I'm going to start out today, for the next 15 minutes, and I might just shut this ship down for a little bit, I think I'm just going to tell people, besides the fact that I was abandoned by my birth parents, or especially by my mom. I think my mom really did abandon me. I think my father probably was married and he had a little run-vindu with, or a little fun in the action on the side. And it just happened to be a person who might be a nurse, might be a prostitute, or just someone on the main street or main drag, or just an ordinary woman that probably met through a restaurant or something. I don't know, but I guess what I'm going to talk about on this podcast is that it's I don't know how to explain it. When you figured out that you're not just only disabled, and you can't move on with your own disability, and you can't really learn new ideas and new thoughts and new knowledge. I wouldn't say thoughts, I would say new knowledge to learn something, to move up to the next level of your education. That is very difficult for me to learn. And I can read pretty well, but you know what? just to be focused on that book, on that page, on that paragraph, on that sentence can take a lot for me. And I learned skills to, let's say, I read for like 5 straight minutes and then give myself a 2-minute break. I learned that from by reading things on Google or whatever to make yourself a better reader. So you give yourself a break. So to extend it, you start with 5 minutes, and then you go 7 minutes, and you go 10 minutes, and then 15, and then you go to 20. And when you get to 20, you should be pretty good, be able to read and continue to read for 20 minutes straight. If your eyes get tired or kind of crusty or blurry or whatever, give yourself a break. That's something I learned. That's something that kind of works for me. But the knowledge thing is really, I mean, just learning new things is really kind of, it takes a while for me to grasp onto what I'm learning. And I think it's actually not that. It's actually more like remembering what I just learned. So it's not really that I have difficulty learning new things. It's remembering that what I just read 5 minutes ago. And that is personally why when I do read, that's personally why I take notes. Every book that I read from the first 5 presidents of the United States, along with Andrew Hamilton, and I write notes. And I put notes in my book. So that's one of those things I do on my time to make myself more knowledgeable, or to be able to put something in my brain so that it becomes a long-term memory. So let's say tomorrow, next week, I'll remember exactly what I read 3-4 days ago or last week. So that's probably the biggest thing about my learning disability is that for some reason my brain just does not receive new information and keep the information that well in the beginning. And that's probably why I'm always kind of frustrated with the type of jobs that I have to do. So the type of jobs I have to do is very sometimes above high schoolish, but a little bit college jobs, but nothing like, it's nothing to like computer technology or computer software or like say something that would make me $90,000 or $80,000 a year. And a lot of people say, well, you don't need an education to learn new ideas and new thoughts and new projects. However, in my case, it probably would be better for me to learn something like that. But this is really why I created this podcast, because I really wanted people to understand that a lot of times, you know, you can have an average IQ and you don't have to go to college, but sometimes if you don't go to school, or sometimes when you don't learn that well, you can be kind of left behind. And that's what happens to a lot of people, a lot of men, at least a lot of me, of who I am, left behind. And I just wanted people to understand that when you decide to have a disabled child, someday that disabled child is going to be a grown man. And that grown man is going to look like me. Maybe he'll have blue eyes and blonde hair, maybe he have brown skin, or maybe he have, you know, light caramel skin or whatever, or it doesn't matter. But the question really, what I would like to ask people, what it is that people think that people with disability, and I don't want to go on the dark road, but I don't know if I would really want to be alive. If I had to be alive, if I knew this is going to be the road that I was going to take, or this is where my journey was going to go. Okay? So what I'm saying though is this. Now, I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have kids. My friends all grew up, they got married, or have girlfriends or friends or whatever, acquaintances. And what happens to people like me is that a lot of times women are not going to pursue me as a potential mate. in all the right reasons, because I don't have a really great high education. I don't have a really great paying job. I may live on my own. I may pay all my bills and do whatever I need to do to survive, and I work and I hustle and whatever. But in reality, when women see this, my left hand, that's going to be a really setback. And a lot of people don't really understand what I'm talking about when that's a setback. Some people might, as you're watching this podcast or you listen to this podcast, you might say, well, that's an excuse. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and just meet a girl. And I think that's one of those things that you can't say that. You can't tell me how to think and how to do or where to meet a girl, where to meet anyone, because you're not in my shoes. And I want people to understand that when I say that, I don't want to be rude to them. I don't want to be a jerk to them. But a lot of times, even my friends have told me that I should date women who are disabled. And I remember one time this girl that I came across to at a bar somewhere in Standill, and it was a karaoke night, and I hung out with a bunch of people that I hung out with back maybe in my mid-30s, I think. So here I am. No, I'm sorry. I was still in my 20s. So here I am hanging out with all these people, and this girl happens to be there in a wheelchair. And one of my buddies told me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, you should try to date a woman with disability, maybe a lost leg, maybe a left or right hand that's not there, or maybe she has some deformity in her how she stands, or whatever, sclerosis, or I mean not sclerosis, but so something with her spine or something, whatever. And I came across this girl and I asked her one day, does it make sense for you and I to be pursuing each other because we're both disabled? And when she looked at me and when she just said, no, I'm not even attracted to you. One, that's pretty tough. Okay, when she said she's not attracted to me, that's pretty rough. Because I'm not like obese, I'm not like externally deformed in my facial features and all this stuff. But I get it that my left hand and the way I walk sometimes is not very presentable to be, a man who's trying, or who looks, I just have this deformity of the way I walk. But it's not like it's not like I'm in crutches, it's not like I'm in a wheelchair or anything like that. But it's amazing that she was that honest with me. And she said, no, I'm not attracted to you. And then she said, why should I be dating you if I'm not attracted to you? Which proved my point. She doesn't have to be attracted to me. Excuse me, I gotta rub my nose. But I think that's just, to me, that's probably one of the funniest things. One of the funniest things that I heard in a long time from a girl that told me something, because that really kind of, it surprised me that she was so rude about it, but she didn't let me down easy. She didn't say, well, I'm not really attracted to you, but yeah, she just said blankly, no, I'm not attracted to you. What are you talking about? So that's something that, for you guys out there, you girls out there, when you tell me or tell people with disability that we all should date each other, if you're a guy and you hear that from a girl, that's pretty hard. That hurts pretty bad. And when I say men who are disabled, I'm not talking about men who become disabled because of war or a car accident and you met your girlfriend or your boyfriend before the accident. I'm talking about people who are born with a disability. So don't get that twisted. Don't say that, oh, you're just making shit up. So maybe there's people out there who are dating. Maybe there are men out there who are dating women, and they're like, "What are you talking about? I don't make a lot of money. I got a wife, and she works pretty great, and she probably is the bread maker of their family, whatever." But I mean, I just wanted to know. I want to ask people out there if I'm wrong, if I'm overreacting. Am I just talking out of my ass? Maybe that's what I should be telling people or asking people. So I don't think I'm going to actually talk about being disabled a lot, because I don't really want to linger about it, because if I'm going to talk about disability, I want other people on my show, and then they can inspire me of their disability or the lack of disability, or seeing themselves as people with disability. So, I mean, if I was going to talk about it a lot more, I would have people on the show. Now, when Ron is on the show, he has muscular dystrophy. It's like another word I can't pronounce right, so excuse me for butchering that. So, like, we may talk about that, and we may talk about his wheelchair, and we'll talk about his van, and we have talked about that on my podcast. That's on audio, again, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also, if you don't want to download those apps, then you go rss.com. So I just wanted people to understand where I'm coming from. So when I do this podcast, it's not always going to be the same. It's not always going to be about sports. It's not always going to be about politics or being disabled. I may just bring up politics one day and talk about what Kamala Harris and what Donald Trump are battling back and forth. I don't know. But I may talk about, my heroes as a child growing up, or whatever. But so I hope you like this entry of my newest version of my podcast, of my video vlog. And I like to think another vloggers out there based on Jesse and Gina, or not Jen. They created Boyfriend versus Girlfriend, or what's the other page that they have? Pranks versus Pranks. So, and they broke up over like 8 years ago or whatever, but I used to always watch those guys, Jesse and Gina, pranking each other. And I thought that was kind of cool. I like their chemistry, but I could tell that they hated each other's guts at the same time. And if anything that I did wish that would happen is that they got back together. And I don't know, I mean, again, it's kind of bullshit I'm saying this, because it's none of my business, but that's probably one of the only few vloggers that I did enjoy watching week in and week out. Now, they vlogged every single day, and that's part of the reason why they their vlogging went downhill, because they were always trying to come up with new ideas, and I think that pranking each other was a little bit over the top, because they need more viewership, or keep up with that viewership and sort. And they both were going through some stuff personally, which most of us don't even know what exactly they were. But I know one story that it's deep to Jesse's heart, and to most of the people who know a Boyfriend versus Girlfriend, or Pranks versus Pranks, they know that story about Jesse's personal life. So I don't want to bring that up and talk about it, because it's none of my business. I never met him before, and I don't think I ever will. But I want to thank those guys, because they made it look fun. They made it look easy. It was entertaining. It was not like NBC or ABC or these dumb little sitcoms and all this. But it was fun to watch them go on vacation together, and it seemed like they enjoyed their time together. And it's just kind of cool to see two people of the opposite sex enjoying each other's company. And that's, unfortunately, they're not, they don't have that no more. So thank you for those guys. And I want to thank Joe Rogan for coming up with the podcast. I enjoy your guest a lot more than I enjoy Joe, I guess. Let's put it this way. I grew up listening to Joe Rogan's comic stuff. And I thought that at the time, it was funny, but it wasn't that funny. I thought Sam Kinison was a lot better at just presenting the story and being outrageous because he used to be a pastor. And I think Joe does a really good job with questions on his podcast. And I think he's more funny on his podcast than I actually think when he's actually doing stand-up. But that's my opinion. So I don't. Some people might think I'm just I'm crazy for that. So I like to think that guy. I like to think, anybody. I mean, I think one of my other favorites people to listen to is probably Jordan Peterson. I think he's a pretty knowledgeable guy. Do I think that he's a bit sometimes know-it-all? I don't know. I mean, he knows a lot more than I do. I sometimes listen to Ben Shapiro. I don't always agree with him either, but I like new stuff that he brings out, and new, not just new stuff, but the things that, I didn't know of that. So sometimes I listen to Ben Shapiro just to learn something new based on politics. Do I agree with that politics or that idea of what he's trying to say? I really don't sometimes, but I give the guy a lot of credit for saying what he says, and I would love to. He's probably one of my few people that I would like to have an interview with, because he's way over my head. No, I wouldn't say way over my head, but just the knowledge that he knows about his politics and his, Israel stuff and everything else. Whether he's probably a good guest to have to just understand what's going on in the Middle East. Sometimes I don't agree with it, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. But other podcasts I like to listen to, there's I forget one that they talk about music a lot, old time rock and roll stuff and artists that came out with songs. Sometimes I listen to anyone that has Oasis, the Gallagher boys on their show, and I love to listen to how their songs were put together, how Noel put songs together, and yeah, that's pretty cool. So I'm gonna leave it at this. I hope you enjoy my podcast. I hope you enjoy my vlog. If you want to come back to it, be great. If you don't want to come back to it, I lost you. I don't know. I don't feel bad. I wouldn't feel bad because, again, I'm not here to be like, I'm here to have a voice, but I don't know what I'm going to do with that voice. So, thank you. I appreciate you guys. Peace, love. Listen to my podcast, CRAZYDRE Podcast, on Spotify, rss.com has it on there. That's where where I throw out my podcast on that website. Apple, iBooks. Peace, love, and I'm out of here.